Did we really believe that the silence in Brussels would last forever? Did we truly think the most powerful woman in Europe was untouchable, shielded by layers of bureaucracy, protocol, and political alliances so unbreakable that nothing could ever disturb them? For years, that seemed to be the reality. Institutions stable, leadership confident, the system moving with the calm rhythm of a machine that many assumed could never fail. But this morning, everything changed. What happened behind the closed doors of the European Council was no ordinary political sparring. It wasn't a routine dispute over budgets or migration quotas, nor a quiet diplomatic clash to be resolved with a carefully worded statement. According to those present, it was far more dramatic, something resembling a political execution unfolding in real time. Viktor Orbán, long cast as the rebel of Central Europe, didn't merely speak out or threaten another veto. He claims this time he exposed something that struck a nerve, and the atmosphere that followed suggests it landed with devastating impact. This time, Hungary isn't the isolated party under pressure. The entire European Commission seems to be feeling the tremors. For years, the official story was simple and reassuring. Nobody knew of any wrongdoing. No secret arrangements existed. Everything was done according to the rules, repeated endlessly in press briefings and statements. But Orbán asserts that narrative was merely a carefully maintained illusion, and the truth being dragged into the light is so explosive it could shake the European Union to its foundations. This is no longer about mere corruption allegations or bureaucratic mismanagement. It's no longer just about deleted text messages or controversial vaccine contracts. According to Orbán, this goes much deeper. Betrayal at the highest level of European leadership. Imagine, for a moment, a secret protocol, a document proving that decisions involving billions of euros of taxpayer money were made not in parliaments, not debated publicly, and not discussed openly among elected representatives, but quietly behind closed doors long before citizens even knew such. Deals were being considered. Orbán claims such proof exists and that he now holds it. The atmosphere in Brussels today is described by journalists as icy and tense, with frantic phone calls echoing through the Berlaymont building, advisors rushing through corridors, emergency meetings scheduled and then abruptly cancelled, doors closing, security appearing where it normally wouldn't. The usual calm, bureaucratic rhythm of the European capital has been replaced by an uneasy silence. And at the center of that silence stands one key question. Why is Ursula von der Leyen not speaking? Why was the planned press conference canceled just minutes before it was set to begin? Why have official statements been reduced to brief, cautious remarks instead of the confident messaging that normally follows political attacks? What is whispered in the corridors is still being dismissed by some major media outlets as speculation or conspiracy, yet the documents Orbán claims to possess tell a very different story. A story of hidden obligations, secret negotiations, and decisions possibly made under pressure. If even part of that story proves true, this morning may not have been just another political confrontation, but the moment a carefully constructed system began to crack. The chain of events behind these claims did not appear out of nowhere. They trace back months earlier to incidents that seemed at the time technical, procedural, and distant from everyday concerns. But in hindsight, those may have been the first cracks in the surface, and to understand why these latest revelations have sent shockwaves, we need to rewind the clock to May 14th, 2025. On that day, a ruling was handed down that many observers now believe should have triggered alarm bells across Brussels' political landscape. The European Court of Justice delivered its judgment in case T3623, which centered on transparency and access to official communications. The court ruled that the Commission had no legal basis to refuse the release of text messages exchanged between Ursula von der Leyen and Albert Bourla, the chief executive of Pfizer, believed to be connected to negotiations for one of the largest vaccine procurement deals in European history. The judgment was unequivocal. The Commission's explanations for withholding the messages were not credible. At the time, the story was framed as a matter of administrative transparency, treated by many commentators as a routine institutional dispute, with public discussion focusing on whether the Commission had properly documented its communications and whether text messages should be considered. Official records. For most citizens, the matter felt distant and technical. The financial scale of the deal, around 35 billion euros for roughly 1.8 billion vaccine doses, was enormous, yet contextualized within the extraordinary circumstances of a global pandemic, when governments worldwide were spending unprecedented sums to secure vaccines. In that context, the numbers sounded dramatic, but not necessarily suspicious. However, Viktor Orbán now claims that the episode was merely the visible tip of a much larger iceberg, asserting that the missing text messages were far from trivial or routine. He suggests they were part of negotiations that bypassed usual institutional checks, procedures, and oversight mechanisms, arguing that what appeared to be a simple transparency issue may in fact signal deeper structural problems within the European Commission. According to his theory, certain decisions were made in ways that left financial obligations hidden from public view, obligations that, he claims, did not disappear once the pandemic ended but instead remained embedded within the European Union's financial structure. In Orbán's narrative, these hidden commitments eventually created gaps that required new financial measures to fill, and that is where the next chapter of the story begins. The controversial funding proposals that emerged in late 2025, including massive aid packages and emergency financial plans, are now being portrayed by Orbán as part of a much larger chain reaction. Whether these claims are accurate remains fiercely debated. No court has confirmed such a connection, and the Commission continues to reject the accusations. Yet politically, the damage may already be unfolding, because once the idea takes hold that earlier deals created hidden liabilities, every new funding decision starts to appear suspicious. This is why the May 2025 court ruling now seems, in hindsight, more than a legal footnote. It may have been the first official sign that something inside the system was not as transparent or stable as it seemed. If that interpretation gains traction, the current controversy is no isolated incident, but the continuation of a story building for months, perhaps years. Orbán insists that the missing messages were never casual exchanges or insignificant conversations. They were part of negotiations conducted outside normal institutional channels, away from formal oversight and public scrutiny. In recent statements, he has tried to link that earlier controversy with a far larger and more perilous financial situation now confronting the European Union, arguing that the old vaccine procurement discussions were not isolated events, but created long-term financial obligations never fully disclosed to the public or even some member states, and that these obligations slowly accumulated inside the European Commission's budgetary structure, creating gaps that had to be filled later through new funding measures. This is where the controversy becomes explosive. Orbán now claims a direct connection between the missing communications and the controversial 135 billion euro Ukraine bailout package proposed in late 2025. That package, presented as urgent financial support, suddenly appeared as one of the largest commitments in recent EU history. At the time, many observers were taken aback by both its scale and the speed with which it was pushed through. According to Orbán, this was not merely a matter of geopolitical necessity. He suggests the package may also have been designed to stabilize the EU's internal finances. In his narrative, the pharmaceutical deals created budgetary holes, hidden liabilities, and commitments that were never openly acknowledged, and those gaps, he claims, now require new streams of money to keep the system functioning. He has even described the situation with the striking phrase, the Brussels Ponzi scheme, by which he means a cycle in which new financial commitments are used to cover or obscure the costs of earlier ones. It is a dramatic and controversial comparison, widely rejected by political leaders, yet the accusation alone has sent shockwaves through European politics. If citizens begin to believe that earlier deals created hidden financial burdens, then every new funding proposal starts to look suspicious. Every emergency package becomes a potential cover-up, and every large transfer of money raises questions about its true purpose. Orbán's argument follows a simple but powerful logic. First, secret negotiations take place. Then financial commitments emerge from those negotiations. And later, when costs become unavoidable, new funding is presented as an emergency necessity, leaving the public to see only the final step, not the chain of events that led to it. Whether this interpretation is accurate remains uncertain. So far, no court has confirmed the existence of such hidden liabilities, and the Commission has repeatedly rejected the accusations, insisting that all financial decisions were made according to established procedures. Supporters of EU leadership argue that Orbán's claims are politically motivated, intended to weaken Brussels and bolster his own position at home. But politics is not only about legal proof, it is also about perception, trust, and credibility. And once the idea takes hold that the system may be hiding something, restoring confidence becomes extremely difficult. That is why this controversy has grown so dangerous. It is no longer merely a dispute over documents or procedures, but a battle over the credibility of the entire European project. If citizens begin to suspect that major financial decisions were shaped by secret deals, the consequences could extend far beyond a single leader or institution. And that is precisely the scenario Orbán appears to be signaling, a slow-growing crisis of trust fueled not by a single event, but by a chain of decisions now coming back into the spotlight. Tension escalated further when Viktor Orbán began presenting what he described as concrete details to support his claims, arguing that the issue is no longer confined to old communications or past negotiations. He now asserts that real financial consequences are visible in the present, manifesting as missing funds and unexpected budget gaps across parts of the European Union. Orbán pointed to what he described as an internal document suggesting that billions of euros are missing from funds that had previously been promised to several Eastern European member states. Funds that were not theoretical or vague commitments, but had already been negotiated, publicly announced, and were expected by governments relying on them for development projects, infrastructure, and economic recovery. Countries such as Hungary and Poland were among those awaiting substantial portions, and when delays and reductions began to appear, officials initially framed them as technical or procedural issues, but Orbán now claims those explanations were only part of the story, asserting directly that the money was quietly redirected to cover liabilities from older procurement deals, with earlier financial commitments creating obligations that could no longer be ignored, and rather than openly acknowledging this, funds from other programs were allegedly shifted to stabilize the system, while he also returned to the controversial 135 billion euro Ukraine package, arguing it was not purely humanitarian or strategic aid, but functioned as a financial buffer, injecting massive liquidity at a time of growing internal pressures, suggesting that large portions may never reach the intended recipients in the form citizens imagine, and could instead move through networks of advisors, consultants, and NGOs closely connected to Brussels political circles. Claims that remain unproven and strongly rejected by EU officials, yet politically significant, with the most dramatic moment reportedly occurring during a closed-door discussion in which Orbán threatened to read the complete unredacted text message exchange at the center of the earlier controversy, causing immediate silence, a sudden rush of activity as advisors whispered, officials stepped out to make calls, schedules were rearranged, and within minutes the atmosphere shifted from tense debate to quiet alarm, while a European Commission spokesperson later issued a cautious, measured statement mentioning disinformation and targeted attacks on European unity, noticeably lacking the strong, confident tone usually employed in political confrontations. For many observers, that alone raised new questions, and this is where the human dimension of the story becomes impossible to ignore. As across Europe, ordinary citizens face rising prices, economic uncertainty, and shrinking purchasing power, with families in Germany, France, and Italy feeling the pressure of inflation, small businesses struggling with energy costs, and farmers protesting to protect their livelihoods, making the idea that billions of euros might have been quietly redirected behind the scenes deeply unsettling. Orbán described the situation in dramatic terms, calling it the biggest heist of the European taxpayer in history, and whether or not that description is accurate, it captures the emotional weight of the accusations. Because for many people, the issue is not just about numbers on a balance sheet, but about trust, whether the institutions demanding sacrifices from citizens are themselves acting transparently and responsibly, and once that trust begins to erode, even the most stable political structures can start to look fragile, moving the story from numbers and documents into the realm of human consequence, real political danger, and the fragile trust that holds institutions together. As families struggle with inflation, small business owners make impossible choices, farmers fight to survive, and ordinary citizens are asked to tighten their belts, while according to Orbán's allegations, billions of euros may have been quietly redirected behind closed doors in ways no one outside the corridors of power can fully trace, with Orbán describing this alleged diversion as the largest heist of the European taxpayer in history, claiming the audacity is staggering, as citizens are told to sacrifice, accept austerity, and tighten their belts for the sake of democracy and the union, while decisions affecting billions are allegedly made in secret, shielded from scrutiny, and in some cases actively concealed, with messages that might reveal the truth deleted.